XpoCanna presents
the second annual Connecticut Cannabis Expo.
March 25th from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and March 26th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m.
At the Mohegan Sun, featuring the X Cup, New England's most rigorously tested and judged cannabis competition.
Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or looking to get your medical card and grow your very first plant, the Cannabis Expo has it all, open to the public.
Come enjoy the lineup of guest speakers and lecturers covering topics like growing styles to setting up your cannabis business for success.
Legislation, advertising, accounting, medical benefits, packaging, CBD products, hemp, and more.
Learn and grow with the area's brightest cannabis professionals. Everything cannabis under the sun at Mohegan Sun, March 25th and 26th.
The Connecticut Cannabis Expo, sponsored by
Curaleaf,
Radio 104.1,
1029 The Whale,
The Botanist,
Safetiva,
CRQ,
and High Life Packaging. Tickets and additional info at XpoCann.com.
That's XpoCann.com.
So come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. Come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. Well, I'm on that new shit, Crown Royal whiskey and Mountain Dew, mixed with sour apple puckers, and you've got your wake-up juice, kid. I use it to help me feel better about making music. I cannot fight against my nature, so I induce it. A few sips, I'm all ready to get abusive. With loose lips, I turn my enemies into reclusive. It's ruthless, but you don't know you can't outdo this. The truth is, I'm in the business of revolution. It's booming, the scarecrow is musical evolution, a fusion of sounds we crowds gaze and confused with. Step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. Come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. And now I'm proving that this battle I am never losing. I'm choosing to ignore the cuts and bumps and bruises. I'm cruising through these haters, leave them looking stupid. They foolish if they think they'll ever hear my conclusion. I'm through with all these part-timers and their excuses. I'm bruising eagles left and right every time I do this. I'm shooting for the top, no, I'll never settle where you did. The future's in my hands, my grip will never lose it. My crew is ready to obtain the absolution, removing any doubt that we was ever fooling. Come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. Come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. Step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. Come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. So come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us to the new revolution. Come on, step it up, break it down and lose it. Come on, follow us.
Check. Is that good? Everyone can hear me? All right. Hello? Okay. I can hear me, so. All right, so I guess I'm going to get started. So this is a talk about growing autoflowers. Can you hear me? A little louder? Is that better? Maybe I'll try a different microphone. Hello? Oh, that's better. All right. Hope everyone's been enjoying the show. So my name is Corey Fink. I own Focus Seeds, which is a vegetable urban cannabis seed farm in Plymouth, Connecticut. And I specialize in open pollinated and heirloom vegetable varieties as well as autoflowering cannabis seeds. So today I'm going to go over a bit of an introduction about how to cultivate autoflowers indoors, outdoors, kind of the equipment you'll need, and that sort of thing. So first I'm going to start off with like a very brief history of what an autoflower is. So an autoflower is a cannabis plant that has a genetic trait that makes it able to go into flower based on its age and not on photo period. Normally, cannabis plants need at least 12 hours of darkness to go into flower. Autoflowers don't need that. So once they hit a certain age, like a tomato or a pepper, they'll just start flowering. This trait comes from Cannabis ruderalis, which is a cannabis species from Siberia in Asia. It was first cataloged by Russian botanists in like the 1920s. The term ruderalis means weedy in Latin, since it grows in newly disturbed soil. During the 1970s, it was commercially brought into breeding in mainly the Netherlands. So there was early varieties called like Early Girl, Lowrider. They weren't that great. They flowered kind of too fast. They were very small. They didn't produce a lot of cannabinoids and terpenes. So definitely not like the plants that we grow today. But over time, the breeding has definitely gotten better. And, new cultivars of autoflowers are basically as good as photo varieties now. So, like I said before, because you don't have to change the light cycle for the plant to go into flower, it's got a few advantages. So, first of all, if you're growing indoors, you can grow them along with your photoperiod plants that you're vegetating out to grow into flower, or like clones that you've just started. Outdoors, especially here in Connecticut and New England, you can do multiple harvests per season. You can sow them in like June and harvest in August, or you can do succession planting. So you could harvest, or you could plant like monthly starting in like late May, June, July, and then you're harvesting in like August, September, beginning of October. Normally, if you're growing cannabis plants outdoors here, you're planting in June and July, and then they're going into flower in August, and then you're harvesting in October. So a lot of people are going to experience problems with like bud rot, powdery mildew, cold weather, rain, that kind of thing at the end of the season, which makes cultivation here difficult sometimes. The autoflower, you can kind of avoid all that by getting those earlier harvests. So for planting indoors, I'm sure a lot of you are indoor growers already. So who here already grows indoors? Okay, a lot of people. How many outdoor growers are here? Not too many. Who's never grown indoors or outdoors, never grown cannabis before? Wow, I'm actually kind of surprised. But yeah, I'm sure most people here know the kind of equipment you need, but I'm just going to run down a quick list of what you'll need indoors. You need some type of growing space, at least 2 feet by 3 feet, up to like 4 by 4 feet. So like Mylar tents are big right now. You could use a closet or a room. Obviously, if you're indoors, you're going to need a light. 200 to 450 watt LEDs are good. And then for autoflowers, you don't necessarily need a timer since that light can stay on all the time, but you're going to save some money on electricity. So a simple timer just set to like 18 hours on, 6 hours off is a good place to start. You're also going to need some type of fans for airflow, like 1 or 2 fans, 6 or 12 inches in diameter. Those are fine. And then if you're going in a tent, I also recommend doing like an exhaust fan, like a 6-inch duct fan. That'll help you regulate the humidity and temperature in the tent. So if the humidity spikes, you can turn that fan on and it's going to suck all that humidity out of the tent. The other thing you will need is just a thermometer with relative humidity so you can monitor the environment that you're growing in. And then I don't know if anyone here is familiar with VPD charts. Basically, a VPD chart is a way to correlate your temperature and humidity. You want to keep them in a certain range. This helps you avoid getting things like powdery mildew and bud rot. They're simple to find. If you just Google VPD chart, you'll see kind of like it looks like a graph with a bunch of numbers. and to be able to correlate, for instance, like you want, if you're growing like in a 70-degree environment, you want around like 70 degrees or lower of humidity. Some other things you'll need are like a hand lens with 60 to 30 times magnification. It's good for like scouting for pests, or if you're going to harvest, looking at the trichromes to see if they're ready. Pruners, some bamboo stakes, wooden stakes for training, twine trellising, that kind of thing. If you're going to do any like scrog netting training, low stress training, anything like that. And then also, just a small spray bottle or sprayer for if you're going to do any foliar applications, or if you're going to spray like horticultural oil, neem, citric acid, something like that. And then for what you're going to grow in, you could do hydroponics, or aeroponics with autoflowers, but I mainly am a soil grower, so that's what I'm going to cover here. I really like using fabric pots or fabric raised beds. For autoflowers, you want to have the largest pot that you can fit in the space for that single plant. So what I recommend is like at least 5 gallons, but 10 to 15 gallon fabric pot is best. Autos, if you try to transplant them, they usually stunt because they have such a short flowering time. So you want to have as much root area as possible for the plant. Autos are also light feeders, so you don't need a lot of different nutrients or bottle nutrients. I tell people like a good organic potting soil is a great place to start. There's some really good local compost and soil manufacturers, Coast of Maine, New England Compost, McEnroe. I know there is a gentleman here from Hydes who carries Coast of Maine. If you go to any decent agricultural or growing store, they can recommend you, a good organic potting soil. If you want some additional nutrients, like I said, I keep it simple. So something like Neptune's Harvest, which is a liquid fertilizer, or like Nature Source, if you need to do any supplemental feeding, is good. So basic overview of like the life cycle of an auto plant and growing indoors. So like I said before, plant the seed where it's going to spend its whole life cycle. So if you're growing indoors in a fabric pot or raised bed in a tent, you want to plant that seed into that pot. So you got your 10-gallon pot, you fill it with your organic potting soil, pop the seed right in there and water it. And within 2 weeks, you should see germination. I know some growers still like to germinate their seeds in like a wet paper towel and like a plastic, like sandwich bag or something like that. You can do that and just plant like right into that pot. But you don't want to let that root get too big because, like I said before, if you stunt that plant, it's going to want to go into flower and you're going to get like this short plant that's just going to have like this one cramped bud at the top. Autoflowers are really easy to grow, but one of the biggest mistakes new growers make, especially ones who are used to like more photo period plants, is they go to try to like transplant it and they say like, oh, autos suck because I grew like a 1-foot plant. But what they don't realize is they stress the plant out from transplanting it too much. Another thing is you want to select varieties from reputable breeders. When you're going online, make sure they have descriptions of the strains, like, how many days from sowing to harvest, what the terpene profile is it best grown indoors, outdoors, that sort of thing. If you can't find any information on a variety, or it's kind of like not clear, what the variety is or what it can do, I'd recommend like not ordering from them. And I also suggest using seed banks within the United States or growers within the United States. A lot of people are still, I was really shocked today, like people are still ordering seeds from like Amsterdam and in Canada and Spain, which, I mean, there's so many local breeders with like, regardless if they're New England or not, like just in the United States. So yeah, I recommend getting something from someone as local as possible. So after you set up your grow, you got your tent set up and your lights hung and all your fans set up and your pot in there or whatever. Like I said, you're sowing your seed, and you're gonna be looking for germination within a couple weeks. You want to keep your environment around 68 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 45 to 70% relative humidity. Like I said, that VPD chart is going to help you kind of dial in that growing area, especially for each variety is a little different. So you'll see as you grow them how they respond. One rule of thumb, though, is once you get into flower, you're going to want to drop the humidity. high humidity environment is going to encourage water formation on the flowers, and that's going to cause, things like powdery mildew and botrytis, bud rot. So after, so when the plant gets 3 or 4 nodes tall, about a foot, some people like to top them. So you can just pinch the top of the plant, the top growing node off. And what that'll do, it'll send the side shoots out to grow more. Instead of it looking like a Christmas tree, it'll look more like a candlestick holder or something like that. That's one easy way to train your plant. The other thing you can do is after like maybe 4 to 5 weeks, you can start bending the plant down under some netting or some trellising and kind of do what people call like a sea green, which is a really common way to train your plant. So after sowing in 4 to 6 weeks, you'll see flowers starting to form. If you're growing feminized seeds, obviously you don't have to worry about looking for males. But if you're growing regular seeds, you're going to want to start looking for any pollen sacs that are developing around the flowering site. You can just look on Google. It's really, really apparent when you start growing. If you look at a picture, within that 4 to 6 week period, you should definitely be able to tell if it's a male or a female plant. And then during this time, this is when you're kind of, like I said before, going to do your training. So within that, and then flowering is going to occur for another 4 to 6 weeks. Generally, autos have a 60 to 90 day flowering time. So that means you're going to sow the seed, and then within 60 to 90 days, you're going to be harvesting. And that's true indoors and outdoors. When you're starting to get later into flower, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, you can also start trimming the lower leaves and the smaller, like call them larvae buds. Same thing you could do on a photo plant. You just want to be a little bit more less aggressive, so a little less aggressive than you normally would on a photo plant, because the flowering time is so short. You don't want to over prune it and stress it. And then after that, you're just waiting for harvest. Signs to look for are third to half of the pistils, which are those little white hairs, turn reddish brown in color. Lower leaves will yellow. Trichomes on the flowers and the leaves will be thick. This is a good time to use your hand lens to see, what the consistency is of the trichomes. They'll turn from like a clear consistency to milky, and then some of them will get even amber. And that's going to kind of depend on you at what time you want to harvest the plant. It's going to be different for each variety, as well as if you're going to harvest it and use it for, flour, or if you're going to process it and make hash rosin, or edibles. So that's basically a little overview of growing indoors. If anyone have any questions on kind of growing indoors, or yeah.
Set it at, something that'll get you good growth and you don't have to stump them or get the light burn, but just leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get really crazy, you can get like a ppfd meter and like really dial in how many micromoles you're giving it. But generally, what you want to do is, as the plant is getting older, you want to raise the light down a little bit. For LEDs, you really don't have to move the light too much, because the light is so intense, and like basically the particles are flowing like straight down. It's not like a HID or a metal halide where they're bouncing all over the room. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could. Yeah, definitely. I would still play with it, especially for the different varieties. But if that's not something you want to really have to worry about, then I would, like I said before, for like a 4x4 area, I really wouldn't go over more than 450 watts. And then, like I said before, you could keep it about 2 feet from the top of the plant. If you're going in a flower and you're seeing like the tips of the flowers starting to get white, that means they're getting too much light. It's not necessarily bad for the plant, but what is happening is the tips of the flowers are like just not making chlorophyll anymore because they have no reason to. So if you raise the light up a little bit more, or turn down the intensity, it'll make it so you don't have that like white coloration. And obviously, if it's so hot in there that your leaves are burning, then not only should you raise the light, but like I said before, if you have an exhaust fan, you should probably turn that on and like lower the temperature. Even in flower, you do not want to get like really over 80 degrees. And then because you're keeping the humidity low too, just be aware of that. You might have to water more too. So yeah. All right. So is there any more questions on indoor growing? Sure, I'll get to that, but yeah. Well, that's what that's what I was saying. Wait till it starts flowering before you start doing any hard pruning, because at that point it already wants to go into flower. The mistake you don't want to make is when it's really young, like before it's 4 to 6 weeks old, start pruning it heavy, because it's going to be like, okay, now I want to go into flower. So you, like I said before, you just want to wait until it's already in flower. You're not going to be stressing it as much. So, yeah, I mean, some pruning is going to stretch it a little bit, but it shouldn't really, as long as you're not, over pruning. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of you're going to have to feel it out as you do it too. So there's no like super, detailed explanation I can give on that. So yeah, I'm going to move on to growing outdoors. So the first thing you're going to need to, yep. Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. So when they get like 4 to 6 nodes tall, so about a foot tall, you can just pinch the top, and what that'll do is it'll make it so that it doesn't have like one dominant leader, and the side branches will kind of fill out. Yeah, so you could do that. I wouldn't do that more than once, just because they flower so fast. Yeah, I wouldn't like pinch back the individual branches again. And then yeah, you could also pinch it back and then do some trellising like you normally would for your. Yeah, but you could still even pinch it, and then as those side branches come out, you could tuck them underneath the netting like you would do with a sea green on a regular photoperiod plant, just so they're kind of a little bit more elongated. And then, like I was saying before, once it's starting to go into flower, if you have like leaves and buds that are underneath that canopy that aren't really getting any light and are small, you can remove those at the time. So, yeah, so for growing outdoors, sorry. Yep. Yeah, you can do that. You can play around with it, but like I said before, I recommend starting with a few varieties and just going straight into soil, like unamended, and see how they do. Like I said before, the autos are pretty light feeders, so you shouldn't have to play around too much with adding additional nutrients. I mean, like I said, there's some varieties that might respond better to that, but if you have a regular kind of regimen you do for photo periods, I would say just cut that in like half and then start with that. And then if you think you need to add more, you can add more. It's easier to add more than it is to take away in growing in general. Exactly. Exactly, and especially because you're growing a plant for 60 to 90 days instead of a photo period where you're going to veg it for 2 months and then flower it for another 2 to 3 months. Like that's one of the reasons why people add so many nutrients, because it's such a longer process, and the plant's going through like very specific lifestyle stages. With auto, it's kind of more of like a ramping up. It's not like this really, long growing process. It's just personal preference. You can do either. I like soil just because I work with a lot of like local composting companies, and I like their products. They're more, for me, they're more efficient, they're cheaper, and they're more environmentally friendly. Especially with things like bottle nutrient, is you're spending a lot of money on that water, and then for salts too, the runoff you're getting is straight. It's mineral salts. So unless you have some way to like catch that or remediate it, it's really not great to just like pump mineral salts into the ground. So like I said, it's but if that's the way you grow, that's fine too. The autos grow fine in that. So for outdoor growing, Same as indoor growing, you're going to need a gardening space, but obviously it's going to be outside. So instead of lights and fans and all that, you're going to have to take into account the environment you're in. So these are going to things like sun exposure. How many hours of direct sunlight do you get? Where's your wind coming from? Is it going to really windy area that might break branches on your plants or anything like that? Obviously, like how big of an area do you have? Like I said before, you need like about 2 to 4 square feet per plant, depending on the variety. And then the most important factor is going to be your soil. Because you're growing outside, you're going to be growing into like a topsoil. I recommend everyone get a soil test through Yukon, especially since we're in Connecticut. It's $12. You take them, give them a cup of soil, send it into the lab, and they'll give you back a whole analysis of the mineral and nutrient content. And they'll even give you recommendations on what you need to amend, or if you have excesses, or even if you have like heavy metals in your soil, like lead. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. The only thing is, if you're going to do a soil test, just know that it's only good for outdoor soil. If you have some like potting soil and you're like, oh, I'll send it to Yukon to see how good it is, the test isn't going to really correlate well. It's just the kind of test they do. It's for outdoor soils. So then after you've gotten your soil test, maybe you've gotten some lime or something, you've gone through what things you need to remediate. Then you want to start preparing that area to plant the seed. And then another rule of thumb is like, if a tomato grows well there or a pepper grows well there, a cannabis plant is going to grow well there. So you don't really have to overthink it too much. So plants can be grown outdoors starting between the first and second week of May. You can directly sow your seeds right to your garden or raised beds. And same thing, if you're doing the fabric pots, it's same size pot, 10 to 15 gallons, potting soil, and you can do those outside as well. You can also do the paper towel or whatever method where you germinate it in that and then transplant it outdoors. Some people are a little bit worried about or they have problems with rodents digging up seeds or eating seeds. That's why the fabric pots are nice, because you can even start them indoors. Start them in your kitchen in front of a sunny window in your 10 or 15 gallon pot. They usually have fabric pots will have handles. So once that seed is up, it's germinated, you can just move it right on outside. You can even put a little cage or something around the seed or seedling, or you can even cut a 2-liter soda bottle that's clear in half, poke some holes in it so it's got some airflow, and put that over where you planted your seed, just so it's protected until it germinates. And then, with indoor and outdoor, the flowering times are going to be the same. 4 to 6 weeks, you should see flowering start occurring, and then another 4 to 6 weeks, you should be harvesting. So as far as the life cycle, that way, it's the same indoors or outdoors. Some of the things that are going to be different outside is obviously watering. So that's something you're going to have to just keep an eye on. If you're getting a lot of rain, then you're just going to need to water less. That's why, another reason why I like fabric pots or raised beds. And then you're also going to have a little bit more pest and disease pressure outdoors, such as something to keep in mind. I'm going to kind of do a quick review of some of the pests and diseases you'll probably encounter. So the first one is beet webworm. It's a small moth that lays eggs in June, and the caterpillars emerge between July and September. They feed on leaves and bud sites, which can cause problems like botrytis, bud rot. So you want to start scouting between, like I said, June to July. That's why the hand lens comes in handy. So you're just looking for caterpillars on your buds. You can either remove them by hand. You can also use something like beneficial bacteria like BT. But I just recommend, if you're going to spray something like that, just do it before the plant goes into flower. Another pest is the corn earworm borer, which I don't know if anyone who's grown outside, you come outdoors, you see a hole and drilled into a branch, you see a bunch of frass coming out, and then all of a sudden the branch will break a couple of days later. That's a corn earworm borer. And those are really destructive because they'll just bore in, and then branches will snap or that whole branch will rot. So like I said before, just be very vigilant looking at your plants. Go outside at least a couple times a week. Look at random plants, look at the underside of leaves. And same thing, because it's a worm, you can use beneficial bacteria like BT, or if you catch them early enough, you can just pick them off. And they're active the same time as the beet webworm, which is, June to July, and then until September. You can also cover plants with insect netting if you have, for some reason, you just have like a really hard time. A lot of agricultural stores will make a really fine netting that you could just drape over the plant, put like a stake in the middle, and then you can kind of put sandbags or rocks or something at the bottom to hold it down. Next pest is aphids. Not really destructive, but you'll see them on like new growth tips. Usually outdoors, there's enough predatory insects that are going to kill them. So cannabis is great to plant around, like generally in your garden where you have other plants that are flowering, that are bringing in bees, stuff like that. The more biodiversity you have generally in that area, the less problem you're going to have with pests. And if you do have aphids, you can also just like clean them off with a little bit of soap or spray like horticultural oil on them. They're usually fairly easy to get rid of. And then there's hemp russet mite. This usually comes from greenhouses indoors or other growers. So also be aware of like other growers in your area. If you have a neighbor who grows too, and he's bringing like clones out of his house or something like that, they might have hemp russet mite. But if you're an outdoor grower and especially if you're growing from seed too, which is another advantage to autoflowers that I didn't mention before, because you're growing from a seed, that seed is not going to have really any pest or disease on it. One of the big problems with clones is, even if people are really vigilant about keeping their clones clean, eventually the pest and disease pressure on that clone is going to get worse over time. So you can think like this clone's great. It even grows well for 2 or 3 years. And all of a sudden you start having like problems with insects and pests on it. So if you're starting from seed, you're not carrying over that insect population year after year. And then there's other things like leaf hoppers and flea beetles, but they're really not too much of a problem outdoors. You'll just maybe see some like minor damage on leaves. And then the big pests that people usually encounter indoors are things like thrips and spider mites. Outdoors, like I said, they're not really a problem either, but indoors, spider mites, you want to definitely clean off the area, prune it off, use like a horticultural oil or soap. And like I said before, I just recommend checking your plants with that hand lens a couple times a week. And then some common diseases. First one's going to be powdery mildew. I'm sure a lot of indoor growers are familiar with that. You get this kind of like white powdery looking stuff on like the leaves and the stems. If you're growing outdoors, this mainly happens later in the season or if we get a lot of heavy rains. So growing an autoflower, you can avoid some of that. Once you get powdery mildew, there's not too much you can do about it. So it's really going to be good for you to set. Well, here, I'll get to that in a second. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you select varieties that are going to be resistant to powdery mildew. But what you can also do is spray beneficial bacteria on the leaves of the plant when it germinates up until when it starts to flower. There's things like Bacillus subtilis, which is beneficial bacteria. There's a couple products. One's called Cease from Bioworks. Another one's called Microflora by Copert. And these are just beneficial bacteria that basically colonize the surface of the leaf. So that way these like powdery mildew, the spore will land on the leaf and germinate and then spore out again. And that's that kind of like white powdery stuff you're seeing. But if it doesn't have anywhere where it can germinate because the leaf surface is already coated with beneficial bacteria, then it's not going to get to the point of it sporing out and you'll see the powdery mildew. You can spray things like citric acid in really low concentrations. But like I said before, once you have powdery mildew, it's already within the plant tissue. So, you can spray that area or what I recommend is if you do have an area, it's only on one part of the plant, cut that plant off. And then if you're not too far into flower, spray the rest of the plant with something like, a light application of citric acid. And hopefully, you'll be okay. The other biggest disease is botrytis, which commonly referred to as bud rot. That's, like I said before, we have the most problem with that at the end of the season where we're getting cold weather, we're getting rains, especially if you have like any kind of sensitive tissue on the plant, insect damage, stuff like that. That's where that mold can get in. It germinates and it grows. So having an autoflower where you're finishing in August and September before we get that cold weather, that's going to give you a huge advantage. Same thing with powdery mildew. Once you have botrytis, there's not too much you can do. You can cut it off. You can try spraying like a citric acid or something around the area, but there's really not much you can do at that point either. Like I said, select varieties that are resistant to botrytis and also that have more of an open flower structure. If you get those really, really dense colas that are real big, they're going to have, more of a problem with botrytis than something that's a little bit more open, airy flower. I know it doesn't look as good for a lot of people who like a nice bag appeal, but in the end, it's going to be easier to grow. And 9 times out of 10, if you select a good variety, it's going to be just as potent and have just as good terpene and cannabinoid content. And then for outdoor growing, I highly recommend looking at some of the agricultural colleges for their like pest and disease like sheets. They'll have Cornell is one that's great for like if you Google like Cornell hemp, you'll get like a sheet of like what these insects look like, the time of year they come out, and what and it's all for what are most common on hemp, which are the same as all cannabis plants. So it's a good resource. So that's growing outdoors. Does anyone have any questions? How does it for an autoflower? Oh, what? Oh, so you need a short day. Basically, you need a long night. That change in day length basically signals to the plant that fall's coming, and it says like, okay, I need a flower now if I'm going to make seed for next year. So like I said before, because the ruderalis was originally native to like Siberia and Central Asia, the growing season was so short the plants just automatically went into flower. And so it's just a genetic trait. And so that's the only real difference is that it's just that gene is different. One gene needs that switch in the light cycle to tell the plant, hey, it's time for fall. The other one doesn't need it because it's built into its just life cycle in general. Yep. Not necessarily. And also too, if you're gonna grow like autos indoors, don't think you can just run a light for like 6 hours on or 8 hours on because like it needs whatever amount of light. Because what'll happen is that'll also stress it out. So probably it's gonna depend. Like when you say less hours of direct sunlight, is it dapple shade? Is it like more light in the morning, more light at night? It's gonna be dependent, but generally yes. Because you have such a shorter growing time, the plant overall is not going to need as much light. So you can get away with, maybe a shadier area, but you're just going to have to experiment and see how that works out. Yeah. What do you mean by that? Oh yeah, not too much. Sometimes yeah, so because cannabis is a wind pollinated plant, there's really not any insects. There's some insects that will eat the pollen. Like ants and stuff like that, beetles, but it's not like there's bees or wasps that really like carry the pollen back and forth. Yeah, so outdoors for my cannabis, I just let nature take its course and they wind pollinate. Yep. Yeah, so one thing I look for that I don't look for on photoperiod plants is the calyx to leaf ratio because photoperiod plants have been bred for their flowers specifically for so long. There's usually not a lot of like leaves sticking out of the actual flower buds unless they're very large. Some autoflower varieties, you'll notice that there's still like a lot of leaf material within the like a large flowering bud. Um, so it just depends on the variety. If I'm working with stuff that's a little bit older that I really like the genetics from, I'll have to kind of breed that out. So that's like one thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like I said, there's a tipping point too where you don't want to breed for such a dense flower that now it's just gonna like rot because it's so big and heavy and so much moisture in it. Yep. Yep. No, do not do that. Do not do that. Because what you're doing by stressing the plant, you're selecting for hermaphroditic or intersex traits. The way to make a feminized seed is to get pollen from a female plant. So you do that through blocking ethylene production in the plant. It's commonly done using silver, but you need some way to make it bioavailable. So you'll mix like silver nitrate with sodium thiosulfate. That makes it bioavailable, which means you can spray the solution onto the plant. The plant takes in the silver, and then it makes a hormone response. So the plant shuts down ethylene production. And because of the genetic, structure of female cannabis plants, they'll produce pollen sacs, which will produce viable pollen. And because you have only X chromosomes in a female plant that you're pollinating to another female plant, that's how you get female seeds. If you would stress an auto plant, you would get no. You need Y chromosomes, like something donating a Y chromosome to get what we call a regular seed. So you need male pollen to get a Y chromosome. So if you stress a female plant and it produces pollen, like I said before, you can put that pollen on a female plant and make female seeds, which would technically be feminized. But the problem is now you're selecting for intersex traits. So if you go to grow those seeds out, it's more likely that they're going to be hermaphrodites as well and not stable female plants. Yep. I prefer silver without sulfate. You need less applications and smaller amounts of silver. It's just easier to work with. Sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah, they won't produce pollen. Yeah, I mean that happens sometimes. I'm actually working with a friend of mine on a variety right now, and I just had a lot like it's just the plant is not producing a lot of pollen. It's just the variety. Some of the genetic traits in the plants, like even if you reverse them, even if they make anthers, they just do not want to drop a lot of pollen. So it's going to depend on the variety. There's ways around to kind of make the plant produce more pollen, but it happens sometimes. Yeah. Some female plants, even if you're like get them to produce anthers, like the anthers won't produce any pollen if you're trying to reverse them. Yeah, it just happens. It's like breeding any plant. Sometimes the genetic structure just isn't there for it to do what you want it to do. Is there any other questions? Yep. Yeah, you have to have something else going or pollen saved. I do a lot of population breeding because I breed vegetables anyways, particularly like cucumbers and squash and stuff like that. I'm used to working with like 60 to 100 plants at a time, and then I'm crossing them or whatever. So I do the same thing basically with my autos, where I'm starting at least 20 to 40 plants at a time. Yeah. 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 I'll do stuff like that. Back crosses, large populations where I'll take seed off. I have like I said before, like 20, 40 plants. There'll be like 2 or 3 females that I really liked, and then I'll take seed off of those and grow those individually and see which population is the most like the mother, and then do crosses within that, or just do more selective breeding where I'm taking out the things I don't like, and then just doing that over time. Yep. Yeah, most people who are doing like photo plant breeding, especially modern breeders, they're doing like a one plant to one plant cross and then releasing that. I breed with populations. So like I said before, I'm doing like 50, 60 plants at a time, selecting out the ones I want, and then stabilizing that entire population. I usually, most of my 2 releases that I brought with me, or well, I have 3, but the two main ones are F4 generations from the initial cross. So it's four generations of breeding work just to get to where it is. Yep.
I understand a lot of experiments are done with fruit flies because they turn over so rapid. What is the turnover from, what's the time span?
What fruit?
One group of plants goes up, you get the seeds.
Oh, for autoflowers, it's more 60 to 90 days is a normal life cycle from seed to harvest. If you're growing for seed, I tend to take the plant a little bit longer than what it's normal, which you would harvest it for flower, maybe like another 4 weeks. Because like I said, you're not growing for that bud, you're growing for that seed, and that seed's going to take a little bit longer to form. So yeah, it's about 3 to 4 months. And then most cannabis seeds have a dormancy period of another 4 weeks or so. So if you try to germinate them, after you clean them off of the flower, if you try to germinate them before 4 weeks, a lot of times they don't want to germinate. Cannabis seeds are viable anywhere from 5 to 10 years, depending on the variety, how they're stored. Yep. Is there any more questions? Yeah. Yeah. I don't have any like a comprehensive book on autoflowers. I know Jeff Lowenfels just came out with a book on autoflowers, but I think that was more of like it's a very beginner guide. But like I said before, actually I have a couple things written down. The resources I use are more based around like horticultural and agriculture universities. So like I said, Cornell, like anything you can find on their hemp program is a lot of good information. Fluence Lighting has a photobotany guide, which goes real into detail on light spectrum and PPFD, especially for LED lights. It's really pretty, a lot of detailed information. Yes, that's a Fluence Science. They're a light company, Fluence, but they have a photobotany guide on their website. It's like a 10-page PDF, and they delve deep into like light spectrum and micromoles and PPFD and how that correlates to cannabis growing. And then also the Yukon website for soils is a lot of good information for soil growing. But autoflowers are pretty ubiquitous. So if you just do some more of your own research online, you could find a lot of good information. Just make sure it's a reputable source. That's hard to verify if you don't know what's reputable or not. But it should be apparent by like the information they're giving you. If it's vague and there's no links to things and they're trying to just sell seeds or a light or something like that, it's usually probably not the best resource. But there's exceptions to that. Obviously, there's growers who have a lot of good information on their websites and they sell seeds and lights. Like I just recommended Fluence, but just make sure it's as reputable a site as you can vet. Yes. Yeah, no, I'm a horticulturalist. I have a degree in horticulture. I owned a vegetable CSA for 6 years. I've worked in the horticultural industry doing propagation. I've also worked in the hemp industry doing greenhouse consulting and breeding projects. So, yep, doing this for about 10 years now. I am located in Plymouth, Connecticut. Lived here my whole life. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you, everyone. Hope you learned a lot.